Well, good morning and welcome to Tuesdays with the Pilgrim as we continue reading The Shepherd of the Hills by Howard Bell Wright with Chapter 7. Sammy Lane rode very slowly on her way home from the Matthews place that morning after the stranger had arrived. She started out at her usual reckless gait, but that was because she knew that young Matt was watching her. Once in the timber, the brown pony was pulled to a walk, and by the time they came out into the open again, the little horse, unrebuked by his mistress, was snatching mouthfuls of grass as he strolled along the trail. Sammy was thinking very seriously. Aunt Molly's parting question had stirred the girl deeply. Sammy had seen few people who did not belong to the backwoods. The strangers she had met were hunters or cattlemen, and these had all been, in dress and manner, not unlike the natives themselves. This man who had come so unexpectedly out of the mists the night before was unlike anyone the young woman had ever known. Like Jed Holland, she felt somehow as if he were a superior being. The Matthews family were different in many ways from those born and raised in the hills, and Sammy's father, too, was different. But this stranger, it was quite as though he belonged to another world. Coming to the big, low gap, the girl looked far away to the blue line of hills, miles and miles away. The stranger had come from over there, she thought, and then she fell to wondering what that world beyond the farthest cloud-like ridge was like. Of all the people Sammy had ever known, young Stuart was the only one who had seen even the edge of that world to tell her about it. Her father and her friends, the Matthews, never talked of the old days. She had known Ollie from a child. With young Matt they had gone to and from the log schoolhouse along the same road. Once, before Mr. Stuart's death, the boy had gone with his father for a few days' visit to the city, and ever after had been a hero amongst his backwoods schoolmates. It was this distinction, really, that first won Sammy's admiration, and made them sweethearts before the girl's skirts had touched the tops of her shoes. Before the woman in her was fairly awake, she had promised to be his wife, and they were going away now to live in that enchanted land. Spying an extra choice bunch of grass a few steps to one side of the trail, Brownie had turned suddenly toward the valley, and the girl's eyes left the distant ridge for the little cabin and the sheep corral in Mutton Hollow. Sammy always spoke of that cabin as, quote, young Matt's house, unquote. And, all unbidden now, the thought came, who would live with the big fellow down there in the valley when she had gone far away to make her home with Ollie and his people in the city? An impatient tug at the reins informed Brownie that his mistress was aware of his existence, and for a time the pony was obliged to pass many a luscious bunch of grass. But soon the reins fell slack again. The little horse moved slowly and still more slowly, until by the relaxed figure of his rider he knew it was safe to again browse on the grass along the path. So, wondering, dreaming, Sammy Lane rode down the trail that morning, the trail that is nobody knows how old. And on the hill back of the Matthews house, a team was standing idle in the middle of the field. At the big rock on the mountainside, where the trail seems to pause a moment before starting down to the valley, the girl slipped from her saddle and, leaving Brownie to wander at will, climbed to her favorite seat. Half reclining in the warm sunshine, she watched the sheep feeding near and laughed aloud as she saw the lambs with wagging tails greedily sucking at their mother's sides. Nearby in a blackcaw bush, a mother bird sat on her nest. A gray mare with a week-old colt following on unsteady legs came over the ridge, and not far away, a mother sow with 10 squealing pigs came out of the timber. Keeping very still, a young woman watched until they disappeared around the mountain. Then, lifting her arms above her head, she stretched her lithe form out upon the warm, rocky couch with the freedom and grace of a wild thing of the woods. Sammy Lane knew nothing of the laws and customs of the so-called best society. Her splendid young womanhood was not the product of those social traditions and rules that kill the instinct of her kind before it's fairly born. She was as free and physically perfect as any of the free creatures that lived in the hills, and keenly alive to the life that throbbed and surged about her. Her woman's heart and soul responded to the spirit of the season. The droning bees and the blossoms that grew in the cranny of the rock, the tinkle of the sheep bells as the flock moved slowly in their feeding, and the soft breathing of Mother Earth was in her ears, while a gentle breeze that stirred her hair came heavy with the smell of growing things. Lying so, she looked far up into the blue sky, where a buzzard floated on lazy wings. If she were up there, she would perhaps see that world beyond the hills. Then suddenly a voice came to her, Aunt Molly's voice. "How do you reckon you'll like being a fine lady, Sammy, and a-livin' in the city with the big folks?" The girl turned on her side and, raising on one elbow, looked again at Mutton Hollow with its little cabin half hidden in the timber. And as she looked, slowly her rich red life colored cheek and neck and brow. With a gesture of impatience, Sammy turned away to her own home on the southern slope of the mountain, just in time to see a young woman ride into the clearing and dismount before the cabin door. It was her friend, Mandy Ford. The girl on the rock whistled to her pony, and mounting, made her way down the hill. All that day, the strange guest at the Matthews place was the one topic of conversation between the two girls. "Shucks," said Mandy, when Sammy finished a very minute description of Mr. Howitt. "He just some revenue, like's not." Sammy tossed her head. "Revenue? You ought to see him. Revenues don't come in no such clothes as them, and they don't talk like him neither." "Can't tell about revenuers," retorted the other. "Don't you mind how that un fooled everybody over on the bend last year? He was just as common, and folks all knowed he was just one of them. But this one ain't like anybody that we ever met up with, and that's just it," returned Sammy. Mandy shook her head. "You say he ain't hunting, and he sure ain't a-buying cattle this time of year, and he ain't a-wanting to locate a-comin' in on foot. What else can he be but revenue?" To which Sammy replied with an unanswerable argument. "Look here, Mandy Ford, you just tell me how would a low-down revenue be asking a blessing like Parson Bigelow does?" At this, Mandy gave up the case, saying in despair, "Well, what's he a-doing down here, then? 'Tain't likely he done come into the woods for nothing." "He told old Matt that he was sick and tired of it all," answered the other. "Did he look like he was a-ailing?" Sammy replied slowly, "I don't reckon it's that kind of sickness that he meant, and when you look right close into his eyes, he does appear to be used up kind of like." In connection with this discussion, it was easy to speak of Miss Lane's fairy prospects, for was not the stranger from the city, and was not Sammy going to live in that land of wonders? The two girls were preparing for the night when Sammy, who was seated on the edge of the bed, paused with one shoe off to ask thoughtfully, "Mandy, what is love anyway?" Mandy looked surprised. "I reckon you ought to know," she said with a laugh. "Always been a-hanging around you ever since I can remember." Sammy was struggling with a knot in the other shoelace. "Yes," she admitted slowly, "I reckon I ought to know, but what do you say it is, Mandy?" "Why, it's just a-caring for somebody more'n for everyone else in the whole world." "Is that all?" The knot was still stubborn. "No, it ain't all. It's a-going to live with somebody and a-letting him take care of you, 'stead of your folks." Sammy was still struggling with the knot. "And it's a-cooking and a-scrubbing and a-mending for him, and sometimes it's a-splitting wood and a-doing chores too, and I reckon that's all." Just here the knot came undone, and the shoe dropped to the floor with a thud. Sammy sat upright. "No, it ain't, Mandy. It's a heap more than that. It's a-nursing babies and a-taking care of 'em till they're all growed up. And then when they're big enough to take care of themselves and you're old and in a way like Grandma Bowles, it's a-looking back over it all and being glad you done married the man you did. It's a heap more living with a man, Mandy. It's a-doing all that without ever once a-wishing he was somebody else." This was too much for Mandy. She blushed and giggled, then remarked as she gazed admiringly at her friend, "You look mighty fine, Sammy, when you get fixed up with all them pretties you'll have when you and Ollie get married. I wish my hair was bright and shiny like your'n. How do you reckon you'll like being a fine lady anyhow?" Here again Sammy turned upon her helpless friend with, "How do I know if I would like it or not? What is being a fine lady anyhow?" "Why, being a fine lady is living in a big house with carpets on the floor and looking glasses and not having to work to do and wearing pretty clothes with lots of rings and things and she paused, then finished in triumph, "and a-riding in a carriage." That wide questioning look was in Sammy's eyes as she returned, "It's a heap more than that, Mandy. I just don't sense what it is, but I know 'tain't all them things that make sure enough a lady. 'Tain't the clothes he wears that makes Mr. Howard different from the folks we know. He don't wear no rings, and he walks. He's just different 'cause he's different, and would be no matter what he had on or where he was." This too was beyond Mandy. Sammy continued as she finished her preparations for retiring. "This here house is plenty big for me, leastwise would be if it had one more room like the cabin in Mutton Hollow. Carpets would be mighty dirty and unhandy to clean when the menfolks come a-tramping in with their muddy boots. I wouldn't want to wear no dresses so fine I couldn't walk around in the bush with 'em. And it would be awful to have nothing to do. As for a carriage, I wouldn't swap Brownie for a whole city full of carriages." She slipped into bed and stretched out luxuriously. "Do I reckon I could be a fine lady and be as I am now living here in the hills?" The next day Mandy went back to her home on Jake Creek, and in the evening Sammy's father with Wash Gibbs returned, both men and horses showing the effects of a long, hard ride. And that's the end of Chapter 7. We'll continue next week with Chapter 8, Why Ain't We Got No Folks? Until then, take care, stay safe, and God bless.